is clean. Some of them think why is it clean. No, you already told me. Once Lando comes out. It's meant for it.
Yes. Good afternoon. Welcome back. We are now taking a presentation from Group Governance. The presentation is on the City of Johannesburg Governance Framework, and it will be presented by Ms. Funeka Makakula. Funeka is one of the deputy directors within Group Governance, and she's looking after a very big portfolio, the economic growth portfolio that has about 7 entities: your JPC, Market, JDA, Roads, Metropause, Tourism, MTC. Which one did I leave? And then she also looks after 3 big departments. That's Transport, DD, and which one? Development Planning, House Amo. So let's welcome Funeka Makakula to take us through the governance framework of the city. Funeka, thank you.
Executive Mayor, Acting City Manager, Acting Chief Operations Officer, MMCs, EDs, NEDs, IACs and GACs, officials, citizens of the city, Program Director, greetings. I will be taking you through the governance framework. I have a few slides, but because I'm such a technocrat, in these 20 plus slides, there's 4 slides that I think are core, in my view. And that is slide number 14, which is the service delivery agreements, slide 3 and 4 read together, which is the legislative framework, and it will be slide 24, which is the quarterly performance assessment, and lastly, for housekeeping purposes for the board members, it's slide 16, which is the shareholder policy. Okay, so this is actually the items of focus that I want to invite you to follow with me. The governance model, looking at the separation of powers, the cluster system, the quarterly performance assessment, the flow of information, administration, looking at the group concept, municipal-owned entities, as well as group advisory committees. So this is one of the slides that I think is actually quite critical, which is the legislative framework where we operate within as a department at group governance, but also as boards. So what holds us together is the Constitution of South Africa, the Structures Act, the Systems Act, the MFMA, the Companies Act, the bylaws, the MOIs. I think the COO has spoken to this. Not the COO, actually the acting city manager, the SLAs, the shareholder compact, the governance frameworks, as well as the service delivery agreements. This slide, because I've been told I have 15 minutes and no pressure, I will just speak briefly to it. And I want to talk to the MFMA. The MFMA is, it provides mechanisms for, amongst other things, sound financial management and prudent appropriation of budgets. And this is one of the things we actually assess, one of the components that we assess at group governance and reporting to see the financial sustainability of the entities. I think the executive mayor spoke to this, and we carry this with us all the time because we need to make sure that we are in line with the MFMA, we are in line with the Systems Act. Also, obviously, the SDAs and the SLAs are quite important to us. Going into the meat of the governance model, the governance model, it seeks to enhance good governance. That's the core. And I think this is quite important because it actually makes it simpler to understand. It's good governance, transparency. I think the executive mayor has spoken to it. And the reason why we do some of the assessments that we do is to actually promote transparency, the sharing of information between ourselves, the citizens of Johannesburg, as well as the executives and the political offices. So if I were to put it in simple, the governance model's objective is to actually facilitate a relationship between the three legislative pillars of local government, which is legislature, executive, and administration. We look at the strategy, the short, the medium, and the long-term vision of the city. We also look at the mayoral priorities, and we align our assessment to that. So the methodology that we adhere to when we assess the entities is actually taken from the medium-term strategy, which is the IDP. But I will go into the detail of that when I get to that slide. This is the principle of the separation of powers. We have council, we have the executive, we have the administration, and underneath, overarching all this, is the office of the ombudsman. And I think when we attend these board meetings, we also understand this principle, because we need to give the board members the space to deliberate and share information as they are experts in the industry. And we come and we give advice, and we give advice as according to what the priorities are, what the policies of the city are, and we advise on that. But we do not want to actually come there and change the environment of deliberation between the board members and the innovation that they want to impart with the entity. These are nice pictures. The separation of powers being continued. We have legislative, and we have the Speaker of Council. We have the executive mayor. We have administration, which is the acting city manager. The separation of power principle between legislature and executive authorities seeks to encourage appropriate checks and balances to ensure accountability, responsiveness, openness, as well as viability of the city. And the openness and the transparency is actually quite important, because we have been put in the positions that we are. And I know sometimes we would always say, I'm employed by the city of Johannesburg. We have been employed by the citizens of Johannesburg to do right by them. This is the group concept. The group concept was actually established in the city to actually focus the customer, to actually be customer-centric, if I could put it that way, so that the citizens of Johannesburg are able to access information, but also to know where to go when certain information is required. So this is why we are here. We are here to service the city, the citizens of Johannesburg. And the citizens of Johannesburg, which is quite interesting, we are also citizens of Johannesburg. So we are here also to actually service ourselves. I've lost my mouse, but I'm trying to find it. Here we have the cluster system. In 2011, there was an institutional review, and the institutional review bore these 4 clusters, which is the economic growth cluster, which I am the custodian of. There's sustainable services, and I have a colleague of mine in the same department that takes care of this, Mr. Zipozonke Khatebe. The human and social development cluster, which is led by Mahlubi Khatebe. I know there's a lot of Khatebes, but they are not related. I can put that up front. Then we have the good governance cluster, which is just recently been filled and is being led by Ms. Buitumelo Malibia. So we have our work cut out, and we try to actually interface with each other to share information, because we need to take what is happening at my cluster, share it with what's happening at sustainable services, because it has a bearing to what's happening at the economic growth cluster. The human and social is actually the service delivery cluster. So whatever we do at economic growth cluster, whatever we do at sustainable services, has to actually filter to the human and social cluster. So we interface, we share our assessments at board levels, we share our assessment of the entities and their performance, so that we are able to see where the gaps are. So if there is an issue with regards to a late payment to one of the intercompany that has given a service within the city, we are able to talk about these issues, and that's why it's important for us to work together. So we do not see ourselves as individuals, as cluster. We actually see ourselves as colleagues that are there to actually filter the information and the discussions that take place at cluster level. This is the slide that speaks to where the boards are and where the boards actually report to. Right at the bottom, you would realize we have Joburg Tourism Company and we have Metro Trading Company. We have the boards in the fourth line, in the light pink or pastel pink, and they actually report to their relative MMCs, and the MMCs would actually report to the executive mayor, and they would also report to the city manager in terms of the performance of the entity, the challenges, the highlights, but also the opportunities that they actually foresee for the entities they preside in. This is a slide that I spoke to that I think it's a very important slide. If there's anything else that you should remember from this presentation, is the slide, the service delivery agreements. The service delivery agreements, I think there was a time when we were doing the assessments in the department, and the question came and said, what do we do with the product once it's done, and what impact do we have to the citizens of Johannesburg after we have actually seen the gaps, after we have seen the opportunities? Then what do we do with the information? What do we do with the data? Then the answer came that we need to package it. We need to package it so that we as the city of Johannesburg enter into a service level agreement with the citizens of Johannesburg. And I know when I talk to municipal entities, they would always say the service level agreement is between the city of Johannesburg, themselves and group governance. And that is not entirely correct. The service level agreement is actually the agreement between ourselves as the city of Johannesburg, whether you are operating under the ownership control or you are actually the shareholder, and the citizens of Johannesburg. So the service delivery agreements are very important, because that's when we actually test some of the initiatives that we put forward, some of the gaps that we have seen, some of the challenges that we want to address, if it is actually changing the landscape of the citizens of Johannesburg. So the entities would operate under the ownership control of the municipality, like I stated earlier. The ownership control generally means that the municipality have the control over its financial and operating policies as a majority sole shareholder. The service delivery agreements are actually anchored in Section 76B of the Systems Act, and it's also responsible for ensuring that municipal entities comply with all relevant legislation, and they are managed responsibly and transparently, as the executive city manager and the acting city manager has stated, and that they meet their statutory contractual obligations. The objects of the municipal entities are defined in the MOI, like I stated earlier, and this is Act over Section 15 of the Companies Act. The City of Johannesburg municipality entities are monitored by group governance and reporting, which is the unit that I come from, that is responsible for the regulation as well as managing and monitoring these companies for maximum shareholder returns. We look at financial performance, we look at legislative compliance, as well as policy. The shareholder compacts, it actually regulates the relationship between the shareholder and the board of directors. It outlines the accountability of the board, so it outlines your fiduciary duties. It includes oversight of the performance of the board by group governance. It monitors the extent to which the board achieves its objectives and specific performance targets. And in cases whereby the performance is not meeting its target, there are remedial actions where necessary. Attending the boards as well as board committee meetings of the company through its representatives in order to protect the shareholder value, which is very important, and to secure the return of the City of Johannesburg, which is the owner of the entity. The shareholder compact also outlines the role of the chairperson of the board, the CEO, the term of office, and all the other housekeeping of the entity. It also included clauses of termination, the appointment of the board members. So this is actually important because the shareholder compact would actually give you an outline of some of the expectations from the shareholder, and also the interpretation of what the entity executives are expected to do in a snapshot, that is. This is another slide that I think it's actually, I said it's 4 slides, so I'm now on the last, on the 3rd slide that I think it's quite important, which is the objectives of the policy, the shareholder policy. So these are actually housekeeping issues, and the reason why I say this is because the purpose of the shareholder policy is to regulate the establishment of the governance of group advisory committees, NEDs, IACs, and it talks to the recruitment processes, it talks to the meeting management, the powers and the limitations, the resignations, the retirements, the rotations and the removals of members, the roles and responsibilities of the committee, the TORs, the terms of office, the remuneration and the reporting protocols. So these are all operational matters that relate to the running of the board, as well as the audit committees and group advisory committees. The board of directors are given powers to independently manage the entities on behalf of the City of Johannesburg. The MOEs are fully owned by the City of Johannesburg. The city has adopted a shareholder approach in all its dealings with the entities to provide efficiency, transparency, accountability, as well as oversight. And I think we can all agree that these are actually the strong pillars of good governance. Now, this is a slide that I probably should not speak to because I think all the board members probably understand this one. The expectations of the shareholder from the board of directors is the understanding of the legislative prescripts. You are the custodians of governance. You have the shareholder mandate. You also are there to make sure that you give strategic leadership and also to impart industry knowledge because you are specialists in your industries. And all this actually assists us with the prosperity of the entity. And this is a slide I think when we wake up and we go to these boards to play oversight, it's a slide we have in mind, how we engage with the boards and some of the advice that we give to the board members. I won't spend too much time on this slide because I think both the executive manager and the acting city manager have spoken to it. But I just want to probably explain our role, because you always see us coming into these boards and we introduce ourselves as shareholder representatives. We are actually, according to the MSA, Section 93D, non-participating observers. We attend all shareholder meetings. We keep the council informed on how voting rights were exercised, as well as all actions on behalf of the municipalities by their representatives. In turn, the COJ would monitor and assess the report on a quarterly basis. So we have a methodology that we adhere to that is based on the midterm strategy, which is the IDP. And we do an assessment of the performance of the entities. We meet with the MMCs on a quarterly basis to give them a chairperson's briefing in some of the gaps, some of the highlights, but also some of the opportunities that we see when we are in these meetings. And this is because we have a unique role. We sit in these meetings and we are not specialists in industry, but we actually listen to industry knowledge that is being brought forward by the board members. We know the mandates of the city, we know the policies of the city. So we bring all that together and we are then able to do an assessment in terms of where the gaps are, where the opportunities are, as well as where the challenges are. We also do the assessment of the integrated report. The integrated report is actually, we comply to the international integrated reporting standards. It's one of the things, or one of the initiatives that we introduced, I think in 2014, but my colleagues will keep me honest to this. In 2014, when we usually ask ourselves questions as well. Do the citizens of Johannesburg know what the entities are doing? Do they know how their money is being spent? And the integrated report is published on the website of each entity. It should be published on the website of each entity. We also guide the board on the shareholder, legal and governance matters, and we work closely with the company secretaries in this to make sure that we assist the board and we do not mislead the board. So there's also checks and balances there, because it's us from governance and we also have the company secretary there to give guidance. Now I just want to talk to a summary of our services. I'm almost done, Advocate, which is the shareholder services. So shareholder services provides these services. Recruitment of NEDs and IACs. They organize the annual general meetings, the board inductions, as well as board assessments. They host the quarterly governance forum. They appoint the appointment of executive directors of entities, ensure that MEs comply with all applicable legislation, which is IDP, policy frameworks, as well as the service delivery agreements. We focus our attention to impact on key business sustainability areas. I think this has been quite a word that has been spoken and emphasized, which is sustainability, financial sustainability. So we actually, that is what shareholder services would give the boards. Now there's a unit which is in the department as well, which is group governance and reporting. So I've just spoken about shareholder services, now I'm moving to reporting. One of the products that we actually produce is the quarterly performance assessment. The quarterly performance assessment we compile it as a team, and it's compiled in clusters, and we meet with our relevant MMCs to brief them. We meet with the entities themselves to actually make sure that we are looking at the same thing. And are we actually seeing same opportunities? Are we seeing the same challenges? Are we also seeing the same highlights? So they would submit a report to us, the first draft and the final draft, and we assess that, and we have a back and forth with the entity and the MMC's office, and it ends up at mayoral committee, and at times I'm told it does end at council. So we are the eyes and ears of the MMC as the shareholder rep. We brief, as I stated, the MMC quarterly. We present the outcomes of the assessment on key performance areas and governance areas. We also play a role of being an early warning system. So the only mandatory reports are actually mid-year and fourth quarter. We do first quarter and third quarter to be able to add value and also to be the early warning system if ever we see that there could be challenges that we could actually see at the mid-year and final quarter. I'm under pressure now because Advocate is standing here. We also do the integrated reporting report, which is a culture that I think personally it's a good culture to embed in the city, because this is how we engage with the citizens of Johannesburg. They know what JDA, what GRA is doing, not only potholes, but they know also some of the good initiatives and the positive initiatives that are actually happening in entities. Now, this is the last slide that I said it's very important. It's the quarterly performance assessment. We actually look at the 4 pillars as outlined in the IDP: expenditure management, completeness of revenue, supply chain management, as well as clean audit. These are the critical areas that are outlined in the IDP. We believe the rubric in this methodology is when we get these 4 principles right, obviously there's activities under each of these 4 critical areas. We are able to address issues of compliance, internal controls. We are able to plan better. So the reason why we would actually say the entity should have quarterly targets, it's because we want them to plan better and to not have fiscal dumping, because now it's financial year end and CAPEX has to be spent, and then there's fiscal dumping. We also believe that this rubric helps us with the reporting aspect, how we report within ourselves as colleagues, but also how we report to the City of Johannesburg citizens, as well as equip our leadership in terms of what is exactly going on in our entities. Underneath, I will not go into that, but these are actually the indicators that would actually look into, which is achievement of performance objectives, compliance with laws and regulations, financial reporting, as well as service standards. And all this helps us to actually improve the performance of the City of Johannesburg. I'm almost done. It's the last slide. There is another unit in group governance which is group committees. They take care of the group oversight committees. They will take care of the secretariat role, and we actually at group governance and reporting assist with the strategic and the content element to the group advisory committees. So we have group performance audit committee, group audit committee, group risk governance committee, and all these are municipal owned oversight committees. Thank you.
Thanks, Funeka. It was supposed to be long because, like the executive mayor indicated in her keynote speech, that this city was formed in 1884 and it grew up to where it is today. And when post the democratic dispensation, we had different municipalities in this area. that were later amalgamated to form this magnificent big metropolitan in South Africa. Look, it was fragmented, and we never had what we call a governance framework. I call it a corporate Bible, maybe with some Old Testament references, because it tells you where we come from. It helps you whenever someone joins the city. We are able to give them this corporate Bible to say, this is how the city is actually structured from a reporting point of view. All the separation of powers organs that we have, policies and a number of things. So it's a big document that is then being summarized in these few slides. So it's quite big. And thank you, Funeka. I think we have already engaged with entities, boards, when we were doing the inductions at an entity level. So we've tried to explain this framework in detail. This is at high level. But I've got a question before they actually, if there are any questions that they have, I want us to look at this thing. When the city, it was formed as a metro, late 99 or so, it was experiencing your solvency challenges, cash flow challenges and all that. Apparently said that it was one of the reasons why the project of 2000 to 2002 came in to corporatize some departments to form these entities as agencies, utilities, or companies. But the other question, what was the objective there, Funeka, before you sit down? They wanted to achieve about 7 things here. One, in terms of the financial review, I spoke about the cash flow challenges that they had. To say, let us reduce the accumulated deficit that the city experienced. One. Now the question is, it was 2002, and now it's 20 years later, right? 2022. How far have we gone on that? The ultimate goal was to have a sustained, efficient, or rather a sustained fiscal health. I just want to link the two so we can do a review. How far are we? When we talk about these frameworks and all those things, they talk to that. The second thing, it was the issue of the institutional overhaul plan to say, let's integrate all these municipalities. We have a unitary municipality, the executive arm, executive mayor, and. How efficient is that system of a single and efficient council when you look at it 22 years ago? Third one is the issue of the fiscal policy implementation plan that speaks to the reporting protocols and the frameworks that we have. The finance people talk about the gap, IFRS, the MFMA reporting content elements on what needs to be captured in those reporting. When we were having that meeting yesterday with the SDG colleagues, we spoke about the integrated reporting. She referred to the culture of sustainable reporting. Now, how far are we? We have got the M-score framework that needs to be implemented across the local government space. So how far are we as the city of Johannesburg? 20 years back, I understand the other one could be recently. There was an issue of systems review, integration, and costing. Now, you spoke about revenue challenges, EM, when you were here. The city manager spoke about the revenue challenges. And if we don't collect, forget about the city, all the dreams that you outlined to say, let's bring back the hope of the city. Actually, it could be a deferred dream if we are not collecting. So, how far with the integration of our systems? You spoke about the data cleansing, MMC Sudabi. And this was a dream in 2002. 20 years later, we still have some incompatibilities in terms of the systems we use, SAP, what Chief Ilaro will report on billing and what we'll collect, and all the crises and all the names, your Pagamas that we had and all that. 20 years later. We then had, lastly, what I will call the organizational review strategic analysis in terms of privatization of these mechanisms of service delivery at the departments to form these entities. We have them. And the idea was to bring your improved service delivery to ensure that there is efficiency in entities to address a number of performance challenges. Is the system helping? I know that I'm bringing something complex. It could not be something to discuss today, but it's something that the board members, when they go back, we start to think about these things to say, how good is the structure and the mechanisms that we have in place? Funeka, no, thank you very much. I'm not sure if there are any questions. I'll check some, and maybe you might not leave. I've seen there's one from Rory. Please go.
Thanks, Program Director. I just want to ask a question about the service delivery agreement. Because unlike my colleague from JDA, we actually have been given that contract. Now, it's a very high-level document. And I think to some extent it's a generic document. But each of the entities, other than the annexures, of course, but each of the entities has got a different thing that you want us to do to make it a well-run city. My question is, what is the tool, what is the document, what is the contract where that granular detail can be found? It's not in the business plan. It definitely won't be in the IDP. It's not in the SDA. So when I'm talking about granular detail, and please forgive my question, we're having our first meeting on Friday, so my question might come from ignorance. But to get a well-run city, on the one side, there has to be very precise description of what the service is that the entity must deliver. And then on the other side, the contract has to say how much that costs, because it has to be linked to the budget. So my question simply is, where is that housed?
Thank you, Rory. I have to acknowledge firstly that you have the SDA. It's a legislated process. Hence, you will have it almost standard across all entities. That's Section 76 of Systems Act. Good. But underneath, like you have rightfully referred to, you have annexures that are specific to an entity with clear objective or programs or KPIs, which is your corporate scorecard. You have the corporate scorecard as the first one. It's a summarized thing where it's captured in terms of your commitments or your KPIs. The second one that you have is your service standards charter per entity that outlines the service standards that relates or apply to that specific entity. That's the detail. Now, if you want more further detail, it will find expression in your shareholder compact, which is now specific between the shareholder, the EM, MMC, and the board itself. We have got that information there. You go further to say, where do I get this granular information as well? When you look at the business plans, that information is actually contained, and it's more detailed in that case. Now, the SDA, by design, it's meant to be high level. I think I've tried to answer that one, but if maybe there is a need for further engagement, we will. There was an issue of where we've got the previous one that speak to the priorities of the previous administration and all that thing. And you say, EM, we want your document. We want you to sign on commitments that we are driving as the leader of the city. So we have got the IDPs out, they are commenting, and we don't want to give you a draft. Actually, that draft will be coming out, but we want you to sign the final one. But the detail and other things, I will engage with the member or any of my colleagues. Even Siponek seated next to you, he's from governance. Thank you very much. Is there any other question?
Yes, please, Coordinator.
You can go, please.
Chair, one of the slides speaks of the Board of Directors having both the right and the obligation to effect a remedial action. Could you please give us one or two examples of what type of remedial action could be taken and when? Could you please give us an example of the board being able to take this action itself? Give us an example of a situation where the remedial action needs to be implemented by perhaps an outside agency. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to take it in the context of consequence management, your remedial action, because some technical issues will be addressed at that level. Now, the example is where there's wrongdoing that has been done, in most cases recurrence, we have seen colleagues being suspended, that's a remedial action. We have seen colleagues being removed from their positions, to put it politely, rather fired from their substantive position. That has happened a number of entities without making reference to a specific entity. Now, then you say outside the agents, I would assume you are referring to the shareholder. Again, if there is wrongdoing, especially when it comes to the board of directors, we have done it. A good example of which is not something that we enjoy and we don't wish it to happen with the new board. Last year we suspended about 3 chairpersons, that there was an allegation of wrongdoing, and where there is a need to dissolve the board, we dissolve. So we do exercise the shareholder authority. That is very clear. And just to answer that question, I may need to make reference to Section 93D that speak specifically to the communication lines that we have and the role of the executive mayor to convene a shareholder meeting with the board to come and account on a number of issues. If there's unhappiness, we do take a decision to that regard. I know that my response is quite high level, but there are remedial actions that gets taken, both at a shareholder level and at an entity. But we usually have challenges when it comes to the executive directors. When the shareholder wants to come in to address specific challenges, you start hearing now the board, depending on what's the direction at that particular time, making reference to the Companies Act and the independence that they have. But I think the acting CM and the EM spoke about the importance of the local government legislation that prevails over the Companies Act, appreciating that these companies were incorporated in terms of that piece of legislation, but they are unique, they are ring-fenced. If you look at City Power, the name of the entity, at the end there, in brackets, you will have your RF, ring-fenced. So it means that Ambassador are not purely independent, and we are strengthening that arm from a shareholder point of view, because I always say we're an active shareholder. We are not a disinterested shareholder like some of the institutions you have in the JSE. We are a shareholder that is active. That is why you have all these legislations and the shareholder representatives. Thank you very much. Last one, Ambassador.
Chairperson, there are 2 things that that concern me. One of them, we have this very good reporting system every quarter with the MMC, but there doesn't seem to be any liaison between the entities themselves. Now, the MMC for ours, the very good and active Michael Son, he's got water and he's got power and he's got pick it up. But MMC Funzi sitting over there runs Joburg Roads Agency. And there needs to be close cooperation between City Power and roads. Every robot that's out, City Power gets blamed for it. I inquire and they say, no, there's power there, but Joburg roads haven't got spares to repair the robots. There doesn't seem to be coordination. I would think that at least once a year, the entities should perhaps have a workshop aimed at seeing what we can do to promote new thinking, new ideas, new action, so that we move out of the silo operation and towards cooperating in the interests of the city of Johannesburg. 5 years ago, during my first stint on City Power, I started nagging about the fact that we should be producing electricity on every roof, on every municipal-owned building in this city. We could produce a really significant amount, and it could be much cheaper than getting it from Eskom. But it takes so long to get this done. Years ago, we started talking about the whole funding thing and City Power's billing. What happens is we sell the electricity or provide it. We then send the accounts and we throw them over a wall and they go to Treasury, and then Treasury at the end of the month or sometime sends us some money, and it never actually is the same as the money that we would like to see. So I think there could be much greater cooperation between us, and we could come up with some really innovative ideas and good moves to benefit the people of Johannesburg and the mayor's priorities.
Thanks, Ambassador. I think this issue, EM, we discussed it twice. It was raised by EM and the MMCs. They said there are no cross-pollination or coordination that is taking place. There's no synchronization within entities. You can see that they are doing different things and all that. EM, perhaps, I've noted that the CM has stepped out. I think it's something really that we need to expedite. It's been raised at this forum. I think I will take it offline with your office and acting CM so that this thing we address, because I think it leads to the issues that we have in entities. There is no synchronization of what we're doing. I think it is noted, and I want to say already it was raised. I know it's in the EM's task to attend to this issue.
Thank you, Advocate, and thank you for the question. It is a big concern and largely responsible for our inability to deliver. It's because we're not talking to each other, and most of the solutions require more than one department or entity. What we've done, when we looked at our business plans that we tabled last week in council, we realized that our KPIs don't reflect codependencies, and that we tend to identify a champion, and a certain function will only reflect in the business plan of the champion, and the support functions will not be performance managed on their support function towards achieving that KPI. So we've tasked GSPCR, Group Strategy, Policy, Coordination and Reporting, to start looking at a transversal model of doing business planning. It's going to affect not only the departments, but the entities as well. So we need to have these conversations now, in fact, in this 7 weeks, while we're finalizing our business plans, where the entities need to say, these are our codependencies. And they need to communicate that to the MMCs, and it needs to filter through to GSPCR governance, and it needs to find expression in our business plans. When it appears in the business plan, then we're able to do performance management. So I'll give you an example. When I was MMC Health, JDA used to build all our clinics, yet they only appeared on my business plan. So I had to give account, even in council, on the work of JDA. And once you know you're not going to be held accountable, it's easy to drag your feet, it's easy to not really even care. And so we need to start with our planning framework. Our planning framework needs to demonstrate and reflect those codependencies. And it is on the table of group strategy. I think it was 2 mayoral committees ago, or the last one, in fact, just before we tabled the business plans, the draft, we asked them to start looking at a framework, which I'm sure they'll report back to us soon. But even in our cabinet meetings, what I've started doing with the MMCs is to ask them, how are you doing, but what codependencies do you have? Which MMCs are not supporting your work? Because even at a political level, that awareness needs to be there. That in order for this entity to deliver on their mandate, they need my support in this fashion. And accountability needs to go throughout that ecosystem. So it's going to take political leadership, but also within the administration through our planning framework. It will also reflect in our budgets, because what then happens is, if it's not in your business plan, then you may not even have the budget. A good example, let me use JMPD. They're expected to provide support to everybody in carrying out their functions, particularly within law enforcement. So whether it's environmental health practitioners or it's the planning department going out and issuing citations, they can't do it without the Metro Police. But if it doesn't reflect in their plans, they won't have the budget to have the resources that they need to be able to provide that support. So it requires a matrix, really, and GSPCR is going to have to figure it out, and we've asked them to do that, and I hope that we'll hear back from them soon, failing which we'll have to look at external resources. But I did ask them to put together a task team. We've got great resources, even in other parts of the city, that are skilled in M&E that can assist us with that. So yeah, definitely a concern, and we're definitely working on it. Thanks.
Thank you, EM. May I take the last hand, and it's online. It's from Simpiwe Zengwa. Simpiwe. I think we can now move to the next item. We are receiving a presentation on how does a board satisfy the needs of the shareholder, the city, by providing value to the communities, suppliers, and employees. This presentation will be given by Mr. Temba Maseko, but before he comes here, I just want to read something brief. Mr. Tembo Maseko is a former CEO of the Government Communication and Information Systems. He also the former spokesperson for the Cabinet and the Government of South Africa. I want to say he succeeded one of the finest brains, Mr. Joel Nash-Tans, in that department. He served as an MP in the National Assembly from 1994 to 1995. And then he also served as Superintendent General of Gauteng Department of Education from 1995 to 2000. That's for about 5 years. He then worked as MD of the Damelin Education Group and CEO of Sifikile Investments during 2001 to 2002, followed by a term as a Director General within the Public Works Department. That's from 2003 until he was appointed. He is a former VC, having graduated with BA in Sociology and Law, and also has got a degree in LLB from Wits University. He holds an MBA from De Montfort University in the United Kingdom. And I want to say, EM, with your permission, I can compare Mr. Maseko as the bravery, that brave son that we have, because we should not shy away to say, this is the gentleman that stood firm and denounced the syndrome called the state capture in this country, and we've got to talk about it. It was not popular by then, but he was brave enough to stand, and I know he paid a very good price for that defiance. maybe he suffered in his career, but he stood still. And through that level of bravery of which you spoke about, to say you want board members that are strong, that are brave, that are able to help us to cleanse the cancer that you referred to. And indeed, he saved this country from the brink of collapse. And he will indeed go to the history books as one of the greatest leaders. And we are pleased that today he is here, put Temba, to talk to us about what I've referred to. And he's currently the director for executive education at VETS School of Governance. And I want to quote what Professor Mzuki Sipoko said about him. And he said, Temba comes with high leadership pedigree and a practitioner's experience in public policy and governance. Unquote. Hence, we have him here. And he's an author of one of the interesting books for my country. Welcome, Mr. Marcel.
Okay, Mayor, while he's trying to sort out the presentation, let me take this opportunity to thank you for the invitation. And I must say that after listening to you this morning, I can safely declare here this morning that you are my favorite mayor in the country today, just after listening to you. And it has nothing to do with the fact that you are also a vetsy like me. Although listening to you, I could tell that when you were doing your first year at VETS, you said 1977 or something, I was already, did you say 76 or 77? Or 87 or something like that. But anyway, I had left VETS a long time when you did that. Fortunately, I've got backup. I'll use my paper presentation because there seems to be a problem. They can't download the presentation. I was asked to talk about good governance. How does a board of an MOE satisfy the needs of shareholders or stakeholders, community suppliers, and employees? And the question basically says, what does a board, or how does a board respond to the needs of the shareholder, the mayor? And I thought I'll start by talking a little bit about context, saying a little bit about governance. And what I'm excited about is that a lot of the presentations that we've listened to this morning covers a lot of my topics here. So I'm just going to go through the presentation quickly on those areas that have been covered. So I'll talk context. I'll talk about good governance, how it's defined, what it means for the municipality-owned enterprises. And then I'll say a little bit about what I term stakeholder mapping, sharing some thoughts about what the shareholders expect from you as far as dealing with stakeholders is concerned. Okay. So I just press, just go down. Yeah. Okay. there we go. Okay, it doesn't seem to be moving. Oh, there it is. Okay, so that's my agenda. So can you come back here? It's not changing on my screen, it's changing up there. It's changing up there, but not on my screen here. I can't see it. Oh, they're not talking to each other, this laptop and this screen. Okay. Can you help again? It's changing up. When you look at the page. Look at the page. Oh, it's slow. Okay. It is slow. So I'll talk first and then it will come a few minutes later, a few seconds later. Or we must do it full screen. Let's do this. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's slow. I'm going to have to try and do. Apologies for this. Technology is it's moving a bit slow. Can I do anything about it? Oh, okay, just using that. Okay, let's start there. Let's start there. I thought I should start by just saying a few words about context because as members of the various boards, you got to understand your environment, and I think the various speakers have mentioned this. What is very clear to most of us in the country is that there's a bit of discontent in the public space and also a bit of disillusionment, largely because of the real and perceived poor service that our citizens are receiving from government in general, but also the scourge of corruption that's reaching every part of South African life, and it's something that we really need to be concerned about as members of the board, but also as a city. Most importantly, the lack of accountability. So many things are going wrong in our society, but we see very little accountability taking place. So that's something that I think is important for us to talk about. But also, all of these things are leading to what I term a decline in public confidence on public institutions. But also, we should be worried about the fact that this decline is also undermining confidence in our democracy in general. And that is why we're beginning to see a reduction in the number of people who are going to vote during elections. And we know the polls have shown a decline as far as that is concerned. So we should all be concerned about. And the only positive thing about this concern is the fact that it's what this concern is delivering to our country is the notion of coalition governments which are becoming the norm in the country. And I think this is a good thing because it basically means that we're no longer going to have a situation where there's one domination by one party. We're starting to see coalition governments emerging, and coalition governments, in my view, are going to deliver something positive because political parties are going to make sure that, in fact, they hold each other accountable in rooms like this, except they should do so without turning these rooms into boxing matches. But I think it's something that we should welcome as a country. Coalition governments also mean that there's going to be a revision and a review of mandates. So, for example, your IDPs have already been amended to take into account the political manifestos of parties that have been elected into government after the elections. And I think that we're beginning to see something that is very positive arising out of that. Why does context matter? Well, as you are all aware, the country is experiencing a decline in services, service delivery or services in general. And examples that affect all of us on a daily basis will be things such as load shedding and potholes that are beginning to emerge in every part of our country. And Mayor, as you know, even apps such as your Waze map is beginning to have a function that tells you around this corner there's a pothole. It basically means that, in fact, these things are becoming such a serious problem that even international platforms are acknowledging that we have that as a problem. What is also good as part of context is to also understand the fact that there's an increasing demand for accountability, for efficiency and effectiveness from our citizens. And that is something that we need to be seen to be responding to. All of these things are happening at a time when the levels of poverty, inequality, unemployment are already a major part of our society, but importantly, all of these things are leading to alienation of our citizens, and that's what I believe led to what we saw, the rioting that took place in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal during July of 2021, where our citizens took into the streets, caused a lot of damage, and we saw more than 300 people actually losing their life as a result of that. And that's because, as a government, we are not seen to be responsive to issues of poverty, inequality, and unemployment that are facing our citizens on a daily basis. State capacity, Madam Mayor, is also in decline, and that is something that we should all be concerned about. And this is largely because of the lack of skills in many of our public institutions, but also an element of politicization of the administration, where in many instances we find people being employed into very important positions, not so much because of their skills or capacities, but because of their association with this or that political party. And I think that's something that we need to be able to address as a government, so that we ensure that we employ right people into right positions. All of these things are also leading to the public service, your entities, the city, being seen as an unattractive employer, especially from young professionals who are concerned about the fact that the state, or working for the state, is working for an employer that is seen to be unfriendly and inefficient, and not providing good services to our citizens. And many of the good, talented, especially young people who could be adding value to government, are actually not finding us as a good employer, and we're losing out on the key skills that we should be attracting to the public service. Who is the shareholder as far as the MOEs are concerned? Now, this issue has already been covered in great detail, but I'm just going to deal with it very quickly. As it's already been indicated, Council is the overall governing body for the city, and it's also the custodian of the city's IDP. Council then delegates this power to the executive mayor, who then delegates functions to the various MMCs responsible for certain functions. The council itself gets its mandate from the electorate, and communities participate in decision-making through their participation in the development of the IDPs. So this is the need for you to understand the mandating process that takes place in the city. After elections, you would know that the councils have a major task of making sure that their electoral mandates, that is the political promises that political parties make before elections, those need to be aligned with the IDPs. And it's something that we are starting to manage very well, Madam Mayor. But in many instances, you find that political manifestos exist in one hand, and a lot of these are not yet translated properly into the IDPs. And it becomes important to make sure that you don't have an IDP speaking one language, promising certain things, and an electoral mandate that doesn't talk to the IDP in its totality. Then Council, when it has adjusted its IDP in line with the electoral mandate, then Council delegates execution of some of its mandate to the MOEs, and that's where you come in as members of the boards to execute some of the functions of the Council. So you are implementing your mandate on behalf of your Council, but it becomes important for all of us as members of these boards to know that the Council, through the Mayor, is still the custodian of the IDP, and they're responsible for making sure that the MOEs actually implement good corporate governance. The shareholders' responsibility, in my view, is to set the overall direction for the city, and I think the Mayor did that extremely well this morning. They set and approve policy for the city, as explained by the Mayor, but it also needs to ensure that there's greater accountability, and this is done through the various committees that have been explained in the previous presentation. It oversees and monitors implementation. So when a mayor or an MMC calls you as a board or an MD of an MOE, you need to understand that they're actually trying to fulfill their responsibility of monitoring and overseeing implementation, because they do this because they are accountable to the electorate, the electorate that actually gave them a mandate through the elections. Good governance, the best place to understand this whole concept of good governance is the King IV Code of Good Practice that I'm sure all of you have heard about. And this is a very important document that I invite you as members of the boards to familiarize yourselves with. This document already talks about the issue that we've just raised, Ambassador, the need for integrated thinking within the city. This is one of the key underpinning philosophies of the King IV report. It also says organizations are an integral part of society. Thirdly, it says you need to include your stakeholders in the implementation of your mandate, but also you need to see yourself as a corporate citizen. The King report then defines good governance as ethical and effective leadership that seeks to achieve a number of very important outcomes, which I'll talk to in a few seconds. But I just want to underscore the need for us to emphasize in all your working spaces the issue of ethical governance and managing with absolute integrity. As I indicated earlier on as part of the context, one of the major challenges that we're facing as a nation is the scourge of corruption. And as members of the board, you need to make sure that in the entities that you are responsible for, you make sure that you deal with the scourge of corruption that may be, or signs of corruption that could be emanating in your working space. And I think that's an important challenge that all of us face as a country. So the four important outcomes that all of us need to work towards as recommended by the King report is, firstly, you need to ensure that there's ethical culture in all the companies that you are responsible for. And that is talking to issues of integrity, fairness, and transparency. The previous speakers have mentioned this. I don't need to go into detail. The issue of good performance, making sure that there's competence in your entities, that you meet the needs of all your stakeholders, that you have effective control instruments in place. The previous presentation gave details on that. I don't need to go into that. And that there's absolute legitimacy in what you are doing in the eyes of the various stakeholders that you're responsible for. So in understanding your role as a board, as I said, it's important for you to just have a very good understanding of the governance framework. And I think the previous presentation dealt with that, so I don't need to go into detail as far as that is concerned. Importantly, the board has the responsibility of making sure that you align your strategy as a company with the IDP of the city, but also making sure that you also fully understand and appreciate the priorities that would have been set and communicated to you by the mayor on behalf of the council. It also becomes very important for you to understand who the key holders are in your own environment, what are their expectations, what are their needs, so that you don't just implement what you think as a company is important, but you also have an understanding of what the various stakeholders are expecting of you. You need to ensure there's proper governance. And the issue of citizens coming first, Mayor, is absolutely important. Everything that we do as the various city-owned companies, we need to make sure that we put the needs and interests of our citizens topmost of our heads. You need to make sure that we set performance standards for the various companies. And then lastly, or importantly, establish platforms for regular consultation and feedback to your stakeholders. Because we know there are major concerns out there, but do we communicate sufficiently with stakeholders, all of them, to understand what are your constraints, but what are your plans to try and deal and address the issues and needs of the various stakeholders? At the end of the day, it is clear, and I think it's been made very clear this morning, that you are accountable to the shareholder who is represented by the mayor. The organizer sector must just tell you what the various stakeholders expect of you as the various companies. I think the council has the following expectations. I don't need to talk to that. The mayor, and I think the acting city manager has clarified that. I want to talk about the issue of citizens who must be at the core of what you are about as a company. citizens expect efficient, effective, and affordable delivery of services. We all know the many challenges that complaints are shared on radio stations, social media, in the newspapers. So as a company, you need to know what are your, we can call them citizens or customers for now, what are they expecting from your company, and are you being responsive to what their issues and expectations are as a company? And obviously, the issue of staff who expect to be treated fairly, who expect open communication and consultation with them. So, for example, if you are not, as a company or as a board, able to meet the needs of your staff, it becomes absolutely vital for you to make sure that you communicate and create platforms for them to share their issues with you. Service providers, I'm not going to cover all of those. I'll just talk to the last bullet in that box. One of the major complaints against government, not just the city, but even nationally, is that we do not pay suppliers on time for services. And I'll implore you, Mayor, to begin to set standards, and I'm sure they exist somewhere, that you're going to pay our suppliers on time. What that time is it 30 days, is it 20 days? I think it's something very vital. I mean, I can give a personal example in this regard. I've invested in a pharmacy business. We've been doing vaccinations for the past 9 months. Government said even those without medical aid must go and get vaccinated from the pharmacies, even those who don't have medical aid, and government has not paid a cent for the vaccinations that have happened, and that has led to the closure of 2 of our pharmacies and the retrenchment of more than 30 people, largely because government is just not paying on time. So as MOEs, you need to begin to understand what it means for you not to pay a supplier on time. It means loss of jobs, it means closure of companies, and at the end of the day, you are actually destroying value that has been created by entrepreneurs and business people out there. And that, I think that's not too much to ask from you as companies and as city-owned companies. And I think that you could lead by example to say, in Johannesburg, we'll treat all our suppliers fairly and we'll pay them on time. Civil society, they also expect transparency and fairness, and other spheres of government, national departments, and I think this has been covered quite sufficiently. They just expect you to make sure that you use your resources efficiently and effectively, and that you comply with legislation. If I had time, I was going to talk a lot about this comparison between your typical private sector company and publicly owned companies such as yourselves, but we don't have much time. I'll just focus on the last box there. To say one of the major positive things that exist in the private sector is that there's strict performance monitoring and evaluation. There's good incentives for those who perform, and there's, importantly, consequence management. Now, I'm not saying that private sector is perfect. I mean, they also face many challenges pertaining to corruption and lack of accountability, but as a general rule, I think that there's a lot we can learn from a number of well-run entities that exist. If you compare that with the public sector, we don't seem to have adequate monitoring systems. There are, in some instances, even issues of political interference in execution. I've spoken to 1 or 2 people who work in the state-owned enterprises in the city here, and I get a lot of that kind of feedback, Mayor, where, you know, people working in some of your companies say they get a lot of interference from politicians who want to have a say about this or that tender, and I think that's something that you need to watch very closely to make sure that you don't start having corruption as a major challenge facing you. And one of the things that we need to work very hard at in the public sector is just the need to make sure that there's adequate consequence management. If something is not done properly or somebody gets implicated in corruption, we need to be seen to be acting very quickly. As far as institutional governance framework is concerned, I think this has been covered quite adequately. As I move towards conclusion, I thought the following points would be very important for us to make, Mayor, and I'm pleased meeting some of the people that you have appointed to the boards of your companies. I think that it's important for us to make sure that we adopt meritocracy and skills for appointment into all public institutions, not just your companies, but even within your departments to make sure that you use meritocracy. We need to create opportunities for skilled young professionals to be given opportunities so that people can see, good people with skills can see working in the public service as an important part of earning a living. We need to set very good and reliable performance standards, but also embrace digitization, and I think that's been covered in the earlier presentations. We also need to strengthen accountability and consequence management for poor performance. If there's a major problem in one of your companies, the city, the mayor, the MMC needs to be seen to be actually taking steps to make sure that non-performance, non-delivery is addressed very quickly so that we can restore public confidence in what we are trying to achieve as a city. It's important for you, as I conclude, as MOEs, to understand that you are actually at the cold phase of delivery on behalf of the city. Many of the services that you are providing are things that affect your citizens, the communities, directly on a day-to-day basis. So we need to understand that there are expectations from communities out there for citizens, for services to be improved, rather. Non-executive directors, in my view, can play a very important role in restoring public confidence in the state by making sure that you fulfill your mandate as companies. But you also need to know that public institutions such as my school, the Vet School of Governance, are there to help you upskill your staff, to help build capacity of the MOEs and the city. Because one of the most important things that you need to do is to make sure that you have the right people employed at the right skill level. But you're also inheriting a lot of people that have been in the service for decades. They need a bit of upskilling, and we can play an important role as far as that is concerned. So please do see us as your partner and also as your stakeholder. Thank you very much. I thought I should go through this very quickly because I can see you're more than 2 hours behind schedule. So thank you very much, Mayor, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Masego. I would like to take questions if we have. Executive Mayor.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I just want to talk to the issue you raised around corruption in the entities and political interference. And I mentioned earlier in my presentation that there's been some challenging of the legitimacy of our Group Forensic and Investigation Services unit in the city, and their ability to investigate cases of corruption. But I would like to urge, and I'll do it through the advocate, that we look at a model where we create a pathway for our boards to report that sort of thing. Even while we're cleaning up that space, the GFIS disciplinary board space. But let's create that so that there's automatically a mechanism. And I think knowing that there is such a mechanism will already prevent corruption. But let's establish it, let's share the information through group governance, and let's encourage our boards to please report any such interference. No politician is supposed to speak to tenders and contracts. We are not supposed to get into that space except for the purpose of oversight. And oversight is retrospective. So in other words, I cannot come into an entity and say, I would like this company to get this contract. That's not oversight, that's interference. And it's a no-no in this administration. And if it's happening, it must please be reported. Anybody who's aware of such activities and does not report is in fact complicit. They are complicit, and they've neglected their own duties, because we're all expected by law to report such activities. So I'd really like to encourage everybody to be part of the fight against corruption. Thank you so much.
Very briefly, I welcome that. I think that's an important point, MMC, Mayor. One of the things that we need to do as a country, public sector and private sector, is to create mechanisms for people to be able to report incidents, but knowing that they will be protected if they report, because this is what is called, I'm one of them now, whistleblowing. One of the reasons why people do not report is that they fear victimization in public institutions, state-owned companies, and even in government departments in general. So if as mayor you need to find a way of making sure, because what we used to have in government during my time was just to have suggestion boxes in every office, but those were just a waste of time. So let's create also a safe mechanism for people who want to expose and report corruption to feel safe to be able to bring those to your attention. Fully agree.
Thank you very much. I don't think we have any further questions. EM, we have got some legacy questions here that we'd like to take from our colleagues that have joined us online. I'll read them out. This one is from Ms. Noe Makudu, and she says, the Municipal Systems Act requires a review of the service delivery mechanism when adopting a new ITP. Do we have those review analyses? This is what we are currently doing to review every 5 years, to review our SDA, and the outcomes of that process will then respond to this question. And like the acting CM indicated that would like to include the final commitments or priorities and objectives that are there post the approval of the IDP process. And then the other one says, Mlando, please explain both sides. What happens if remedial actions need to be taken for officials? I think is the same. If there is action that needs to be taken against any official, that should be done. We have got mechanisms in place. If it's something that relates to forensic investigation that needs to be referred to that space, we do consider that route. Entities are being said, rather encouraged to report to GFIS, and we are actually reprimanding entities through CM, those that don't want to recognize that we have centralized the forensic investigation services. So we're working on that. It will also apply to your legal, external. We have centralized these functions and a number of things. So there will be teething issues, but we do consider if those things have to be referred to the disciplinary board that we are reviewing now. That does take place, and already there were referrals that were done. I think the action CM can come in if there's anything that I've missed. So there's been traction. The issue of consequence management, I think it relates to that. Look, it's a challenge that has been there, but when we talk about consequence management, people think that whoever would have erred should be fired, whereas there are different ways to address that. And yes, there are systems in place to do this thing. EM, I think there's traction. Remember the issue of consequence management was raised by Group Audit Committee, and we developed that policy, actually CM, to try to respond, and there was a need to actually report on a quarterly basis on what form of consequence management that has taken place, how far what has happened. I think it's something that we need to ensure that it continues to happen. Thank you. I think I've tried to answer and understand our colleagues actually getting frustrated that we can't hear them when they're asking questions online. EM, we're supposed to take a presentation from Professor Marwala. It's currently not reachable. We will keep on trying. Then I think then that takes me to the next presentation on leadership in emerging complex times. It's going to be an interesting presentation, EM, that we are going to receive from Mr. Dilani Mthembu. And before he comes on stage, I want to read this. Mr. Dilani Mthembu serves as a coaching associate, supporting leadership development at N2 Growth in Johannesburg, South Africa. Mr. Mthembu has a Bachelor of Arts, has a Master's in Science in Leadership and Innovation, and is currently completing his PhD at University of KwaZulu-Natal. Mr. Mthembu is a trained mentor and coach, and has more than 25 years of experience in leadership and management positions, including the private sector, education, NGO, and public enterprises. He coaches executive across 12 African countries in private sector and has developed substantial public sector coaching offerings. He is a skilled facilitator and has successfully facilitated strategic sections in a number of organizations, your ESCOM, and other institutions, including the boards. He has also lectured on part-time basis at Tshwane University of Technology, Northwest University, the Val, on leadership and governance, as well as Pretoria Business School on talent management and leadership in the 21st century. Mr. Mthembu, welcome.
While my slides are being set up, let me say greetings to everybody, especially to the executive mayor and the executive team, and to all members of boards present, and to everyone present here and those who are connected. It's always a pleasure to be invited to share what one is passionate about. Leadership is something that I live, dream, research, write about, and talk about. For simple reason, I've been led and I grew, and I've been led and I got messed up. So I understand the pain and the gains of being led by good leaders. But I've also seen and observed countries and organizations, when they are well led, that they grow and they smell nice. They smell a smell that attracts people, young and old, but they leave legacies. But I've also realized that when countries and organizations are not well led, they collapse, economies fall, companies get closed, and people get depressed. So leadership is at the center of everything we have talked about. But the challenge, though, is that leadership has to exist and be present at times that are emerging, not times that were like my time when I grew up, when I knew that the sun starts from the east and it ends on the other side. Today, because of a number of technologies that are coming up, a number of connectivities, the world is at a space which I call emergence. The world emerges all the time. The world is more complex than ever before. And people, as the world becomes complex, also human beings are also getting much more complex. And therefore, leaders need to understand that they exist in a present context that shifts and changes all the time, which creates circumstances that are unpredictable. As the wisdom that comes from Rupert says, the world is changing very fast. And as it changes very fast, it is no more the big that beats the small. It is the fast that beat the slow. If you take decisions as boards that take more than a month, you must understand that you are too slow. Because the time you make a decision after a month, that decision has already become irrelevant. You need systems in place that makes you be instant at your decision making. And that involves both the executives, the politicians, but also the boards, because you are working in a system that requires fast-moving entities, a system in which I call it a living environment or context where everything connects to each other, where everything relates to each other, where you don't touch one button and it doesn't affect the other button. And therefore, we need to understand that we operate in a living, dynamic context, and we need to be able to create policies, systems, and procedures that are integrated and talk to each other, because we are in a living context. And therefore, leadership for me must be purposeful, transformative. Transformative simply means you must create pain that change happens. You don't, when you lead, manage maintenance. When you lead, you manage change. You create pain. You shift levers there and there because you want your people to know that they exist in a context that is changing. Actually, I normally say leaders must lit the fire behind everyone they lead, so that people not sit on their laurels. People are always up and agile. Transformative is about that. Transitional is about yourselves as boards individually. Transition for me speaks to myself, changing myself, my mindset, my behavior, my state of perception, my being. It's not about just changing your board or your organization, but it is also about changing yourself. How update are you in the current circumstances? And then that requires holistic approach, holistic perspective, integration, courage, and decisiveness, which is what our brother demonstrates here as he was standing, Mr. Maseko. Being agile, being courageous, being decisive, and being ethical. You can't be all what we have been saying since this morning if you don't stand on principles. Principles don't change. Values do change, but principles live forever. Principles cannot be political. Principles cannot be of a different color. Principles are human sets of values that do not change like a weather. So let's work on principles, and therefore I am calling for emergencies of new leadership that is to lead in terms of how we govern. Whether private or public, we must create and reform systems that are partnership-based, that create supportive circumstances, create systems that allow us to recreate all the time and allow us to reposition ourselves all the time and make sure we protect our integrity, we protect our reputations, but we also protect our leadership to lead. And that is why today South Africa has exciting concepts of new organizations like Dudula. That's South Africa. People are doodling because there is no leadership. People are creating Mandela Gufa because we are not leading. People are occupying land because we are not leading. People are looting because we are not leading. I know I'm simplifying these things and people will think that I'm being unfair, but I'm creating a discomfort on your side to understand that if you are not in touch with the people you lead, they leave you and recreate other things. And they don't even listen to you. You become irrelevant. South Africa must wake up. And we don't want to allow a city like Joburg that is so critical for the continent and for South Africa to become irrelevant. We must make sure we wake up and be present, as the last bullet point says. Be present with an open mind, an open heart, an open will to do things that are different, that have never been done before. And that is why coalition governments give us that opportunity to be innovative and to be creative. And I know to those who like power, that is not nice to see or hear. My favorite writer, Otto Schama, says, we live in an era of intense conflict and massive institutional failures. And he says it's a time of painful ending and hopeful beginning. And he says it's a time that feels as if something profound is shifting or dying. And I want to say, from a leadership point of view, there are times when certain things need to die. There are times when certain things need to be get into a painful, transformative process. And we should allow those times for things to die. And one of the things that need to die is our hold into a history that doesn't feed into the present. I am saying this as a South African who comes from that history. But we can't create the future by holding to a history whose time has passed. And we're not creating a new history of the tomorrow that needs to emerge. Let's cherish that history. Let's tell our children about that history. But let us not impose that history to define the future that we need to map. As Einstein says, you can't solve the problem by the same mindset in which you were when you created it. And that is why leaders need to understand that mindset change and personality perspective is important to solve today's problem, not solving it by yesterday's mindset on which you were when you created them. And that comes to ethical, principle, responsive leadership, which many people have talked about, and I'm not going to bore you with more details. But I love this quotation. The quality of the interior conditions that drive change and transformation determines the quality of the exterior condition of change that is evident in the world. So what we see in the world, in other words, is an expression of who we are, verbalized by activities we see: conflicts, falling of service delivery, corruption, and many. They are evident of what is inside us that we don't express, but it gets expressed in the public because our interior conditions have not been changed to reflect the best we want to live for. And that requires this concoction of a model I've put together, which reflects a number of writers that have come with such models, and I've blended it together, that leadership, which is transformational, must make leaders understand that leading is an intuitive sense of being. It's a competence to be intuitive, not to listen to your colleagues, not to listen to your advisor per se. For sure you listen, but you sit down and say, what is it I'm hearing and what am I called to do? And you take a direction, even if it's unpopular, and you go for that direction and you stick to it. That's what I call intuition. But leaders also must learn to follow. In other words, as a board, you must also learn to listen and follow others, even if they are not at your stature of being a board member. Because they may come with some wisdom that you need to understand. And that is why I'm saying context comes from listening, which Mr. Masego was talking about. But also context can be complex. And that is why we must learn to be followers and not lead all the time. And then lastly, we must understand that boards, as we were hearing now from the executive mayor and the ambassador, is about understanding partnership and relationship across, up and down, for everyone to know that we relate to each other. We can't work in silos, and we must map that relationship and manage it properly. I'm saying that is science because managing relationships, it's like putting in a laboratory, which the executive mayor will understand better than me. You put different items that don't work well together to create something that is bigger than each of those items. You create 1 + 1 to make 3, not even 2. And that is about partnership. When you work as a coalition or when you work as a board that comes from different backgrounds, you need to understand that you all collectively are creating something new. Not what you know, not what you learned, not what your politics tells you, but what your context defines for you. Therefore, you must be able to compromise. You must be able to listen. You must be able to understand what our forefather, our icon, said. As I walked out of the door towards my freedom, I knew that I did not live. I knew that I do not live all anger, hatred, and bitterness. I knew that if I do not leave all hatredness, anger, and bitterness behind, I will remain a prisoner. Many of our leaders, as I say, I stay around leadership, I research leadership, I watch you guys when you speak on TV, and I make an assessment of what my intuition tells me about you. I look at you speaking in Parliament, and I immediately put a glass around you, and I see whether you are a prisoner or whether you are free. When you are a prisoner, you speak like a prisoner. When you are a free man, whether you are a politician or not, you speak like a free human being. We can't lead boards being prisoners of our own past and prisoners of our own ideologies. We must be authentic. We must be authentic. We must be truthful. We must be honest when we lead. We must be transformative and be able to guide, because a transformer guides and maps a journey. A transformative leader is present all the time, good times and bad times. You are always there providing direction. A transformative leader encourages critical reflection, doesn't fear to disagree with others, to be beaten in a debate, and admit when you were not right, and move on with the argument and create more argument. A transformative leader evokes new stories, not old stories, new stories. What are the impacts you create to the people you serve? What are the models you create in the board at which you serve? Can you share such models with others that are innovative and are providing new solutions, mapping new values and principles of the future, but also identifying new styles of leading and working, and letting others to follow on your footstep with pride and with courage and with conviction. Practical implications of being present: allow yourself to die, allow yourself to be extinct if it's required, allow yourself to move away and give others a chance, but also allow yourself to die internally by accepting new things and taking new direction. And that is part of dying. I'm not saying be buried tomorrow. The second thing, let go, don't hold. Let go of the things that don't work and allow new things to come and emerge. Be anchored on spirituality. I'm not talking religion here or a church. Every human being is a spiritual being. Allow yourself to be deepened by your own sense of reflection that touches your sense of being and touches your heart to know when things are not right and when things are wrong. I must tell you, I've paid my price too. When I had to stand up against a politician and say, not over me, not over me, when I was in a board. And I said, not over me. And I paid the price, because politicians can make you pay the price. But that happens when you are anchored in your sense of being. You're not just the wind that can blow this way and that way. And you lead and you create a legacy that you want to create. And lastly, advocate, I know time is important. How as a board do you create sustainability for leadership? Because you need to create leadership sustainability within the organization and not create a system. You'll remember when Standard Bank could not make a decision about a CEO, you remember? And they ended up appointing 2 CEOs, you remember? That's lack of leadership sustainability. I went to a school in Mamelodi, I won't say which school, where I found 2 principals appointed to lead the school. It happens in South Africa because of lack of leadership, creating sustainability. Boards, you must create sustainability by creating a balanced humanity that touches these 5 areas that those of you who may know Enneagram talks about. You need human beings who understands who they are in terms of their style, of preferences, of behavior. That is the 9 elements of Enneagram. I'm not getting into details. But you must also help everyone in your organization to understand their personal mastery individually, and also make them understand their personal resilience. How do they stack in when things are tough? And also make people understand what social drives is all about. What makes partnerships, stakeholder relationships work well? And there is a technology today to check all these things. And lastly, energy centers. My mentor, Colin Hall, who was a chairperson of Wool True Group at one time, some of you may know him, he has designed a technology for measuring energy. You will laugh and say, can it be done? It can. By the way, we do have a World Global Energy report that comes every year checking countries where energy of South Africa is and where energy of the States is. It's done these days. There's a lot of technology available to play around with these 5 things. What's the energy of your board, as an example? What's the energy of your board? Because your energy will determine your effectiveness. Towards closure, let's understand as board 3 levels of knowing or of managing a transition. Knowing, everyone knows what knows. We go to school, we learn about knowledge. We pass exams, we get certificates about knowledge. But can knowledge make things happen? In most cases, no. Everyone knows what to do. We wake up in the morning, go to work and get busy. End of the day, how busy were you? I was busy. What did you do? I was busy. What did you achieve? No, I was busy. Doing doesn't deliver. We need to know that. But if the being is not understood, you can't do and you can't know. So in our boards, I'm pushing that we must have a system that measures the being. Advocate. I know as a lawyer it's difficult to get there because lawyers are looking for evidence. But there is a lot of technology available to measure a sense of being. Because if the being is destroyed, is fractured by many societal elements, it doesn't do and it doesn't learn. Until you know the being, you will not be able to know how people work And this one is good governance. A lot of people have covered that, and you can get it on my slides. And I'm leaving leadership sustainability is about creating greatness, is about driving change, is about confronting the past and creating the capacity to look at the failures, but also to map conversations within organizations that are truthful. It's about sustained leadership through building relationships, partnerships, dialogue, conversations, and it's about leadership connectivity based on principles. And therefore, I leave you with a question. This is an African proverb. When an egg is broken by an outside force, life dies. But if it is broken by an inside force, life begins. We can shout here. The mayor may shout. Your chairperson may shout. If it doesn't start within you, nothing will ever happen. It all begins with you. Commit, act, be disciplined, be truthful, be patriotic, and stand for what is right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mtembu. Thanks, that was so inspiring. I'm not sure if I've got questions for Mr. Mtembu. Do we have any questions online? No. I guess people are hungry. Thank you very much, sir. And EM, I want to say, each and every time we invite Mr. Mtembu to come and help us, he always honors that. And at no pay. He has never asked the city to pay. It's always pro bono. We've got to raise these things. We've got to acknowledge the leadership that are prepared to go out there to help the city which they own, which belongs to them. Thank you very much, Mr. Mtembu. May God bless you. With that, may we please break for lunch. And EM, with your permission, I'm asking that we come back at 14:40. I know it's a short lunch. It's because our next presentation will be online. And that person has got other commitments, so we've got to stick to time. Thank you very much.